What's up, all my plant lovers? Devin is here for another episode of Plant Vibes TV. Welcome back. Today, I wanted to talk about why I love container gardening. The other day, last weekend, I gave a talk at a local farm CSA group about this topic, and when I was presenting, I thought, you know, this would be a pretty fun video to share on my YouTube channel. I know a lot of you guys are patio gardeners, deck gardeners, houseplant gardeners, what have you, and I thought this would be a fun video to kind of talk about all of the different reasons why I love container gardening, as well as some of the things I've learned being a container gardener for the last 10 years. And before I moved to this home here in Pennsylvania with 3 acres of garden space, I was living in Seattle and in other apartments around the country where I was basically strictly a container gardener. And so during that time, I've learned a few things and developed a couple, I don't know, reasons why I love container gardening. But before we get started into the video, I did want to make a quick shout out. We are finally finishing up building up our plantvibrations.net website. Samantha's behind the camera smiling because she's been working on that website. So hopefully that'll be up and running soon. So it'll be kind of like a central location where you can find my social media, as well as been thinking about maybe starting a blog, or if you have any other sort of like website content ideas that you think would be cool or helpful, leave a comment below. Anyways, let's get into it. So one of the first things I really love and have just kind of like, the more I grow plants, the more I realize is really cool is you can grow plants from anywhere when you're growing in a container. First and foremost, you're not confined to the soil out in your garden. There's many plants that I might like to have in my garden here in Pennsylvania, but due to the heavy clay nature of the soil here, I can't grow everything that I would like to in the garden. Even, you know, unless I were to amend everything, like these beds up here have obviously been amended, but still there's certain other plants where, you know, you really got to have a certain type of soil or a certain conditions which would allow that plant to thrive. I'm sitting with one that is a good case in point. That would be a blueberry plant. I have a special amended soil in this plant, in this container, a very high acid mixture, which will allow the blueberry plant to thrive. It would be very hard for me to achieve the right conditions for a blueberry plant in my garden, but that doesn't mean I can't grow a blueberry plant. I just will be growing it in a container. In particular, I'm growing, I think it's called the top hat variety of blueberry. So let's go up onto the patio and I'll show you guys some more stuff. So another good example of that would be this blue hydrangea. Out in my garden, I don't have the right pH in my soil to achieve beautiful blue flowers, but in a container, I can get the blue flowers to bloom here. In the garden, this would probably be more like a pinkish color. We know the big leaf macrophylla hydrangeas will change their flower color depending on the pH of your soil. So if you want a particular flower color, using a container is really the way to do it. Another plant that I don't have space in my garden to grow, but would love to if I had the right, you know, area, would be water lilies. These plants are cool. I'm not confined to what I have in my yard, dictating what I can possibly grow. There's so many plants, so many different kinds of climates and soils and conditions that exist in the world. And when we're growing in containers, we can absolutely manipulate our own conditions wherever we may be living to suit a particular plant. Maybe not to suit the entire garden, but one plant, yeah, you can do it, and that's cool. So another thing which is very important for me here in Pennsylvania is growing in containers. We're also not confined to the pests that exist and munch on our plants in our garden. You guys have been here a while, you know I have deer problem. Can you grow strawberries in the ground here? Well, deer and chipmunks and squirrels, they would eat the heck out of them. So I have a beautiful strawberry jar growing here in a container. and I don't have to worry about the pests coming and munching. I do have it kind of elevated to keep it free of these squirrels. You can see this beautiful like contraption I have. So that's kind of cool. You know, you don't have to worry about pests like we would out in the garden when we're growing in containers. So another thing that I love about growing in containers is the fact that microclimates exist whoever you may be, wherever you may be. We all have microclimates on our patios or in our gardens. And what is a microclimate? It's basically an area of your garden, of your yard, of wherever you may be that kind of has certain characteristics that differentiate it from different areas nearby, okay? Basically, let me kind of diffuse that into a really easy to understand concept. Here where I'm standing, it's a cloudy day today, but when the sun is shining, the sun comes down and beats against this white wall, and this area of my patio gets very, very hot. Now, 2 feet over here on my left, this area does not get that beating down sun. It doesn't have the sun reflecting like it does over here on my right. They're right next to each other. Well, that is a good case in point of a microclimate. This area has a microclimate that is much hotter than the rest of my patio garden. So what does that mean to me? That means I'm going to be growing plants that particularly like the sun, they like the heat, and probably can handle being dry better than other plants because they're going to be using the water more quickly. So what have I planted here that loves those conditions? Well, this is where all of my succulents are growing. Okay, so when we're growing in containers, we can really utilize microclimates to our advantage. You guys maybe have saw the video of me moving my house plants out from inside to the outside. Well, one of the plants that you really need to be bringing outside are your succulents, and put them in a hot, sunny condition. A lot of our other outdoor plants, even like my Gerber daisies or my geraniums, you know, this might even be too hot for those plants, but the succulents absolutely love it. So when we're growing in containers, we can really utilize the microclimates that exist to our advantage. Now, another thing that is really cool about growing in containers, which I had mentioned before, is that you can grow plants from all over the world. You can't, maybe you can grow plants from all over the world out in your soil where you live. I certainly cannot, but what I can do is, you know, I can grow these gorgeous adenium desert rose from some of the most wild areas, the deserty areas of Africa, and I can grow them with success here in my garden in Pennsylvania. So in a way, you're transporting yourself to different locations in the world when you're growing in containers. And in particular, you can be growing plants from around the globe that also bring you memories. You know, I don't necessarily know where this plant is native to. This is the Senecio Blue. I don't know where it's from. It's a succulent, but what I do know is that when I was living in Bogota, Colombia with my wife, Samantha, they have this planted as kind of a ground covering plant pretty much all over the city. And so not only am I growing a plant that is definitely, you know, from a different part of the globe, which is cool in and of its own right, but I'm also growing a plant that brings me memories, which is so important. Bringing plants that have memories to your garden, that's what growing plants is all about. Memory plants are the best plants. Growing plants that bring you happy memories is something that we should all be doing all the time. So when we're container gardening, I love to make fantastical, whimsical combinations of plants. You know, you can really create the energy that you desire with container gardening. When we're gardening out in our gardens, you know, I have my dry garden, which is, you know, I'm dictated by the location in my yard, what plants can be planted where. But when we're container gardening, we get to make those decisions. We get to dictate that. And we simply, you know, all we have to do is follow the patterns of the sun, but then we can water accordingly and provide the other sort of cultural care that a certain plant might need. And one plant might be completely different than the plants next to it, but what we can do is start to group plants together that have a certain quality that we are desiring. So this area is kind of like my Valentine's Day colored area. This is where I have a lot of my like pinks and purples and reds all growing and blooming together. You can see down here I have this wonderful bright pink petcoa. And then next to my petcoa, I have a beautiful red petunia and then a pink sun patience. Here I have some wonderful Valentine's Day colored calla lilies that are about to start blooming. I have another impatiens. I have some wonderful large pink dahlias that are about to start blooming, some rose lilies. So I have kind of this grouped theme of color in this section of the garden, in this section of my patio garden, which I just think it's fun. You know, you can really, if maybe you like purples and yellows and you like that contrasting color scheme, well, you can really create those sort of eye-catching or soothing color schemes, whatever you might want, in your container gardens very efficiently. And along the same lines, you can also grow plants, creating these fantastical combinations of plants that would never exist out in nature naturally. So here I have this wonderful plumeria. You know, it's growing right next to some oriental lilies and a dahlia. You know, these calla lilies, these petunias. None of these plants coexist out in nature naturally, but in your garden, in your container garden, they can, and that's fun. You know, out in my physical garden, I like to do a lot of kind of native plants because it's great for the environment, great for our ecosystems, for our wonderful pollinator friends, all sorts of things that have, you know, great reasons for growing native plants. Well, in our container gardens, we can pretty much grow other things that we like just for the beauty, and that's okay. You know, we do our part with our natives, but we also do our part by growing plants that we just absolutely love and adore. Absolutely important. So another thing that I like to really always be considerate of is having plants that are at different stages of life. So you saw a bunch of plants that were pretty much fully grown. Well, over here I have other plants that are kind of just getting started. Now that's really important because when our plants, you know, as gardeners, I've mentioned this so many times, we're always planning for the future, whether that's a week out in advance or a month or a season. We always need to be considerate of what's on the horizon. So having plants that are smaller growing alongside other plants that are larger and fully grown is really important, because as some of our more fully grown plants kind of finish off and they need a nice cut back, like I did with this petunia. I cut it back totally just about a week ago. Or my citronella geranium, I cut this back about 2 weeks ago. They had kind of fully grown and they needed a rest. They needed a refresh. Well, thankfully, I had been planning ahead, and I had another hanging basket plant that was just kind of coming into its own as that geranium was finishing. And that is so important to allow our gardens to have the maximum beauty all the time. And when you have these different plants in different stages of life, it's not like, oh, I have these plants that are just baby plants and they look ugly. No, they don't. They're just getting started. They're just starting to enjoy the show and bring beauty to your garden. So having those different plants at different stages, you know, there's never a bad time to start a new plant, in my opinion. You know, we can always be starting new plants, even if it's June, July, August, it's okay. You know, there's no rules to container gardening. Okay. So another thing that we can really have fun with is the actual containers. You guys may have seen the video that I posted all about container inspiration, kind of finding the right pots for your plants. And I dive really deep into that subject. But when we're container gardening, it's really easy. I know a lot of you guys get stressed out about choosing the container, but don't let that part of the process stress you out. Let it be a part of the process that brings you joy. You know, there's so many beautiful containers we can choose from, whether it's a classic terracotta or a bright ceramic pot, a wonderful cocoa fiber pot, or hanging basket, I should say, Or if you decide, like my mother, to create her own style, her own container, which, you know, she did this just by pasting on mosaic tiles onto the outside of a terracotta pot, and she created this beautiful container. Containers can absolutely elevate the look of your plants. So let it be a part of the beautifying process rather than a stress. You can really create gorgeous, masterful combinations. I think this is just so stunning, and it looks so pretty because I chose to put it in this wonderful pot, and they work beautifully together. So growing in containers, you have the added benefit bonus of creating an entire look with the containers you choose. Now, another thing that is so important to recognize is the ability to move your plants around when we're container gardening. It is not easy to take a shovel, dig something up, and move it somewhere else in the garden. But when we're container gardening, it is a cinch to say, okay, well, my Meyer lemon, I think it needs more sunlight, so I'm gonna put it in a place with more sun and move it over here. Or, like I showed you guys earlier, okay, well, one of my plants is finishing up. I want to take it out of that focal point, put it somewhere less visible, like this guy. This was right here. Well, it finished up, I cut it back, and now it's in a place of less visibility, and I've replaced it with this gorgeous plant. It's so easy and fun to move our plants around when they're in containers. Let that be a part of the joy. Changing the focal points, whatever, if something is just starting to look good, put that in a place of prominence on your patio, on your deck, on your front porch. Let that be a part of the joy of creating your own container garden designs. I think it's so fun. And then the other thing is, you know, when we are container gardening, I love to have some really nice larger containers. It doesn't always look good if you have a ton of small pots. You absolutely need to have some larger containers. But as I was mentioning, plants have their life cycle. So what do? You know, you don't really want to plant directly into those containers. So what I like to do, as a plant is reaching to its full size, I pretty much always grow in these grower pots, these black grower pots, and then I'll slip it into this container and it looks perfect. So what can you do if it's not kind of the right height? Well, what did I have here? I have this empty plastic pot that I just kind of put right here. And that puts the geranium at the right level that I want it to be. And then in this guy up here, believe it or not, what I've done is I have this piece of plywood and I put it in here at an angle. So that kind of helps this plant sit at an angle right in here, and it kind of just overflows in the direction of my deck so that more of the plant life is visible to me when I'm sitting out on my patio. And when we're thinking about where we're actually placing plants, you might be wondering, Devin, how did you come up with the idea to put this big plant up here on top of whatever this thing is, like this fireplace thing? Well, it was actually Samantha's idea, and it was brilliant. And the reason it was such a brilliant idea was that right over there, right there, that is our bedroom window. So when we're in bed, we're waking up in the morning or going to bed at night, we look out our window. If I had just a bunch of small little pots here, they would kind of just look kind of like a little, like, I wouldn't be able to discern the details very well. So we put this large planter up here as a focal point for when we're looking out of our bedroom window and we can see this beautiful plant because it's large, full of color. So you really start to think about wherever you might be hanging out inside your home. Maybe you're on your couch in your living room and you have some windows that look out onto your patio. Well, place plants on your patio so that when you're on your couch, you look out that window and you see beautiful plant life right there. That's what we need to do. Strategically place plants so they become a focal point for wherever we may be living. We grow plants because we want to enjoy their beauty. So finding ways to enjoy their beauty more, it's part of the fun. It's part of the strategy, it's part of the design. And another kind of design thing that I like to do, now this kind of garden is a little bit in disrepair right now because I do have some plants that are refreshing. But I love to have plants just kind of flowing at different heights all the time. When you kind of create these different layers, having a lower plant here, and then I have this guy which is just getting started on this like cinder block. You know, we have these cinder blocks in our garage for some reason, so I brought them out here to create a little bit of height. And having these different heights and levels of plants, it just creates this layered look, and your eyes are constantly moving. And for me, I love that. I like to have my eyes kind of just flowing throughout all the time. And that also kind of advocates for having more plant life rather than less plant life, of course. And when we're container gardening, it is so easy to satisfy all the senses. You know, gardening should satisfy all of the senses. And when you're container gardening, you can do it in as little as 4 plants. You know, first, you should really always have something that's fragrant. This summer, we're growing 2 gardenia plants. This just has been blooming for weeks and weeks and weeks. And we have another one over there in the corner. And the thing is, when I'm growing plants, I always need to have something fragrant. I don't like to have a lot of different plants that are fragrant growing at the same time, because I like to really be able to hone in on what's fragrant. So this summer, we decided on gardenias being our fragrance of the season. So easily right there, the smell, the olfactory sense. The next thing would be, of course, edibility, or the taste. So right here, I have a wonderful cherry tomato. This is called Patio Choice Yellow cherry tomatoes, next to a baby eggplant plant growing right there. And growing in containers, there's so many wonderful edible plants. If you don't want to be growing your own tomatoes, why not grow some herbs like some dill? It's a cinch to do, and it brings, you know, so much wonderful flavor from plants that are easy to grow. Maybe we don't all have space to grow tons of veggies out in the garden beds. I know I don't. I know I don't want the hassle of building a raised bed or actually, you know, creating a veggie garden out in my yard. I prefer to grow my veggies in containers, and it's something that we can all do easily with just 1 plant. Of course, texture or the sensation of touch is obviously easy to achieve with any plant. You know, growing plants for their beautiful foliage, whether it's textured like this or like these geranium, you know, we should always be out feeling our plants. That's part of the sensation of gardening, is touching our plants, connecting with nature from the form of our hands. So absolutely, definitely something that yes will occur when you're container gardening. The sensation of sight is obviously very easy to achieve just by growing something pretty and beautiful like these Gerber daisies. And then, you know, hearing is a little bit more challenging. Maybe just listening to the rustling of the leaves or the birds chirping is enough of a sensory satisfaction when we're container gardening. So when we are container gardening, we do get to satisfy all of our senses really easily, and that's really important. And so lastly, I wanted to just go through a few of my favorite plants to grow in containers. When it comes to annuals, I love to grow Gerber daisies. Geranium, you know, our pelargonium, I think are the very best of all flowering annuals to grow. I have a ton of them for a reason, because they just look really good for a really long period of time. Dahlias, like you saw back there. I love to grow fuchsias in containers, particularly in hanging baskets. I have calibrachoa that I have just fallen in love with growing. I love to grow marigolds. They're so beautiful. They flower for a very long time, wonderful for the pollinators. Sun patiens and impatiens, I think, are fantastic plants to grow. Some of my favorite edibles, like I was mentioning, cherry tomatoes. I love to grow dill, parsley, mint. I have cucumbers. I think cucumbers are a cinch to grow in containers. Just give it something to climb up. I have my eggplant growing, of course, as well. Green onions, tons of wonderful edibles that you can grow. When it comes to perennials, I don't grow a ton of perennials. I do grow some of those some of those blue flowering big leaf hydrangeas. Another favorite perennial of mine to grow is Hens and Chicks, because they look so stunning all throughout the year. You can also grow some conifers, maybe some dwarf conifers are great container plants that are perennials as well. House plants that I absolutely love to bring outside, that need to be brought outside, of course, are the succulents. You guys know I have a ton of house plants, about 100 or so. I don't bring them all out. I only bring about 20 of them outside, and many of those are succulents. I believe succulents definitely need to spend the summertime outside. Another houseplant perennial that comes outside would be my Meyer lemon citrus. If you grow any citrus, you got to bring them outside for the summertime. And I think that's pretty much covers why I love growing in containers. I think it's fun, it's easy to do, it brings a lot of joy, and it's something that anyone at any age can do. You can really grow to your heart's content when we're growing in containers. If you have any of your own thoughts or processes or beliefs or experiences about growing in containers that I didn't talk about, or that you think that you would like for me to talk about one day, please leave a comment below. Make sure you click that little like button and think about subscribing to the channel if you enjoy my plant content. Every single week we are trying to bring new plant related material to our YouTube channel so we can create that plant community. Anyways, thank you guys for joining me here on Plant Vibrations with me, Devin Wallin. I spotted a little strawberry, and I think picking this right now is my cue to say ciao.